How similar is NASCAR's EFI system to the EFI system on a production car? Might be closer than you think. Andy Randolph, ECR's engine technical director, showed me a cutaway version of a carbureted engine. The parts you want to look for are the carburetor and the manifold. Air travels through the manifold, an 8-leg metal piece that guides the air-fuel mixture to each cylinder. You can see the individual pathways in the cutaway manifold. The manifold connects to the engine head, which in turn connects to the engine block and the individual cylinders. Now, a carburetor does two jobs.
When the driver pushes on his gas pedal, it opens the throttle in the carburetor here.
That valve controls how much air is let into the engine. Metering the air coming into the engine is the carburetor's first job. Its second job is mixing fuel with the incoming air. Now, a carburetor is a very simple mechanical device. The problem is that it's not very adaptable. So the first iteration of fuel injection was relatively straightforward. First, trade out the carb for a throttle body. This is the Holley throttle body that all NASCAR teams will use. The throttle body does the carburetor's first job, letting air into the engine. Then put a single fuel injector into the throttle body to control the fuel intake. The amount of fuel provided to the engine can be controlled more precisely by the electronic fuel injection. The EFI system takes over the carburetor's second job. Throttle body EFI was a really straightforward fix because all you had to do was trade out the carburetor. You didn't have to change anything else on the engine. But to make the system even more responsive, you can move to multi-port fuel injection. Instead of a single fuel injector, we use one fuel injector for each cylinder, and we move the fuel injectors closer to the cylinders. This lets us optimize the fuel for each cylinder independently. NASCAR's EFI system is closer to multi-port than it is to throttle body. NASCAR uses 8 fuel injectors, but instead of placing them where they'd be on a production car, they're actually located in the upper part of the manifold. The engine builders would love to have the fuel injectors closer to the cylinders, but that would require redesigning the head, so that's not going to happen anytime soon. There's one more big difference between EFI and NASCAR and in the passenger cars we drive. That has to do with the amount and the type of data that can be collected by the engine control unit, or ECU. All of the data that comes into the ECU is used to calculate the engine's next move. The more data you have, the more precise changes you can make. Now, in a passenger car, the ECU has access to a lot of data. Everything from the oxygen content of the incoming air to the chemical composition of the exhaust gases. When we drive, the ECU is constantly making tiny changes that improve the performance of our cars. Well, that's not exactly what you want in motorsports. So how do you keep the ECU from driving the car? You limit how much data it can get. And that's exactly what NASCAR has done. They've placed limits on what types of sensors and how many sensors teams are allowed to use. That lack of data limits how much impact the EFI system has on the car's performance. A lot of people seem to think that EFI and NASCAR means incomprehensibly technical cars. I don't think that's what's going to happen, in large part because of the limits NASCAR's placed on the technology. When a team needs to save gas, even in an EFI engine, it's not going to be done by an engineer. It's going to be done by the driver, his brains, and his feet, which, in my opinion, is exactly the way it should be.